We'll now move to the next item, which is a local option sales tax presentation. Again, this is no vote presentation only, and I'm invite up David Smith for that, and Patrick Jockstetter.
So while David's, I'll do this first. Your spreadsheet's on there too. So Commissioner Holmes requested that we provide a little background information and education about the local option sales tax. As this board knows, a lot of people may not know this, part of the sales tax we pay here in Henry County is what is referred to as a local option sales tax. LOST is what we call it. The law that governs LOST provides that if a county imposes a local option sales tax, those sales tax proceeds are distributed between the county and all of the municipalities. The way in which the money flows is business owners pay sales tax to the Department of Revenue. The Department of Revenue then distributes that tax to all the recipients in accordance with the percentages agreed upon by those recipients. Every 10 years, as a result of the census, within 2 years after the census, we are required to renegotiate our loss. So we'll be doing this again in about 3 years. So we are currently operating under the 2010 census/loss distribution. The chart up on the board is the agreement that was reached back in 2012 regarding the distribution of lost from 2013 to 2022. And you'll see the percentages. Henry County receives 66%, and the other 34% is distributed among the cities in the percentages shown up on that chart. Now, unlike SPLOST, or similar to SPLOST, but a little bit unlike SPLOST, is that there is a procedure by which you negotiate those distributions, and if you're unable to come to an agreement, there's a procedure the court follows to determine for you what those distribution proceeds are. One of the factors that you consider is population distribution. And if you're looking at that, you might notice that we talked a lot during SPLOST. Our population distribution is roughly 70% unincorporated, 30% county. This distribution doesn't directly reflect that. And the reason for that is the LOST law says you are supposed to include that as one of 8 factors. There are 7 other factors that include things like other sources of revenue, the services you provide, the percentage of sales tax generated in the cities as opposed to into the counties. There's an entire list of factors that you should consider. And what happened back in 12 was the cities and the county were unable to come to an agreement. It went to court, and this agreement was reached very shortly before court. I wasn't involved in this, but this agreement has been in place ever since and will remain in place until we renegotiate the next one in 2022. So those are the percentages, and those percentages go straight to the city, hit their general fund, each city, and those funds are used pursuant to each city's budget. And David is going to discuss and show you the actual numbers after I am able to maximize that screen. There you go.
So, Commissioners, Chair, typically the loss is on a calendar year basis, but what I've done is I've adjusted this for the fiscal year basis. The source of the information comes from the Department of Revenue website, so that's the independent source. I could not obtain audited financial statements for 3 of the cities, so that's why we're using this one. So you'll see a per DOR site. The CAFR, which would be audited numbers, I did not use, so we're just going to use the information that we got from the DOR website. And using that website, you'll see the collections over 6 fiscal year period for each. And using 2018, which was a slide that Patrick presented to you, you'll see that everyone collected a total amount of 34.7 million. And if we were utilizing the distribution percentage that was initially there, you'll see what the numbers should be. And so I did one where there's an effective rate what everyone actually received. And so effectively, we still received our 66%, but Hampton received at a 6.8% instead of their 6.7. Locust Grove, instead of their 5.94, they received 6.01%. McDonough, they were at their 10%, and Stockbridge received more than their 11.36%, which is, theirs was at 11.5%. And if we look at the growth rate over that 6-year fiscal year period, Hampton's, their sales tax, their lost sales tax actually declined from 2014 to 2019, but everyone else increased. Locust Grove increased 36%, McDonough 33%, Stockbridge's receipts increased 32%, and we only increased at a 29% rate for a comprehensive average of about 27.6% increase over that 6 fiscal year period.
And those variations between the first chart I showed on the sort of the rounded percentages and the actual amounts distributed, they're relatively small. We're not 100% certain why they're there. We expect this the result of things like audits and returns. You know, someone can file a return and change the amount of sales taxes they pay, and those types of things are probably what intervene.
Those are the reasons why, as well as the state collects an admin fee, which reduces that amount.
Okay. Any questions or comments from the board? I've got one too, but go ahead. Commissioner Thomas.
I'm trying to figure out how to formulate this question because you were showing the growth patterns of the city
The cities and the unincorporated county, yes.
and the unincorporated. And basically, our number is determined by the unincorporated areas, correct?
Yes.
And that's a little troubling to me because when a city grows, the county grows, because the city sits in the county. And the counties are the ones that normally do the major developments. When I say developments, I mean for the county. I mean, the county would do a big aquatic center. A county would do a convention center. Most cities don't do those type of major developments. And if the cities continue to have these annexing in into their cities, and then they jeopardize the splosh dollars that the county has to operate on, but the county does the major projects. So I'm still trying to figure out how to formulate my question.
Just a small correction, if I may, Chair.
Okay, so
These are the local option sales tax dollars. The special purpose local option sales tax dollars are not included in this, nor are the educational local option sales tax. Those are
Okay,
not
so this-
included in this analysis.
this is
Just the
lost.
local option sales tax.
okay, all right.
Dollars that actually go into the municipality's general fund.
That is correct.
And straight from the Department of Revenue, it never passes through your hands.
Yeah, but I do want to touch on one basis that Commissioner Thomas is talking about. We do need to understand the potential impact that annexations can have on loss. So we need someone to speak to that.
Yeah, so in this interim period between censuses, it doesn't. I mean, once you establish that loss distribution, you're stuck during that interim period. So what you try to do, and you know, we're probably too far away from loss to start getting too deep into the weeds on next time negotiation. But what you try to do when you negotiate loss, and the loss law allows you to do that, is to think about these growth patterns and to try to say what's going to be the relative gain and the relative harm to the county, to each city as the community grows, what other sources of funding and other sources of revenue available, who's providing what services. So something like our service delivery negotiations, our SDS negotiations, the result of that, you know, for instance, we take on parks. You know, we're going to receive, that's sort of where the negotiation is now, we're going to receive SPLOST money for our parks. They may receive some SPLOST money for their parks. In SDS, we're going to operate parks that have countywide usefulness. They can operate their little parks. But we're going to receive property tax revenue for that. So when we negotiate lost, we want to make sure we're receiving an appropriate amount of sales tax revenue to help us fulfill that countywide obligation. Likewise, a city, for instance, if a city has its own fire department, they want to make sure they're receiving an appropriate distribution of lost revenues for their fire department and their future fire department needs. Not 100% of it, because most of those services are funded through property taxes. It's a complicated process, and it's not a check the box. It's not a formula you can plug into and generate an answer. It's going to be the result of a lot of negotiation. It is often the result of going to court and having a judge make that determination for you. But in theory, you are taking those into account. And if we look back, excuse me one second, if we look back at this one, you'll see that over time, they kind of stabilized out after 2016, where the percentages really didn't change. Now, I was not involved in any way in these negotiations, so I don't know how those numbers turned out. But my gut tells me the reason in 13, 14, and 15 you see the numbers adjusting and shifting is because at that time, everyone acknowledged, well, it looks like Hampton's not growing. And so Hampton's percentage fell. It looks like maybe Locust Grove is growing a little bit because they went from 5.5 up to 5.9. It looks like McDonough is growing a little bit. They went from 9.6 to 10. And it looks like Stockbridge is growing. They went from 11 to 11.3. And that additional 1% came out of the counties, or the county gained a 1% because I think the prediction was, well, we lost it. Well, we went from 65 up to 66, so we gained 1%. And I think the thinking back then was probably, well, the county's going to grow some, and maybe our growth is going to outstrip those cities' growth during those times, during 13, 14, and 15, when your economy was still struggling. So I think that agreement took those things into account, but they didn't contemplate all the way down to now. And we're going to have a bigger job because, again, when this one was done, we weren't in population growth mode. We're in population growth mode now, so we're going to have to do a lot of thinking about what's down the road for us. And your sales tax revenue is going to boom. At some point, the consultants earlier said, you don't see a lot of retail growth right now, but you know what? When we redo this for 2023 till 2032, we're going to be projecting some significant retail growth, both unincorporated and within the cities. So we are going to try to accommodate the fact that we know we're all going to grow within our existing boundaries, and we're also going to try to accommodate the fact that those annexations will happen. So it's not going to be easy. We're all going to have our work cut out for us.
Okay, see Commissioner Wilson, then Commissioner Barnes.
Patrick, can you give us a little history how lost come about?
Where it started?
Yeah, where it started,
I don't know
yes.
that I can give you any meaningful history on it. I can tell you this. For years and years and years, the state imposed a sales tax, and that was the only sales tax you had. The state imposed a sales tax, and counties were suffering because all locals, counties and cities were suffering. So the state government allowed you, because you can only do what the state gives you authority to do. The state government allowed local communities to decide for themselves whether or not they wanted to have a local option sales tax, and that's why it's a local option. It's up to each locality to make that determination. So what historically you've seen is those counties that are growing are using lost taxes to help fund themselves because your growth outpaces your digest growth. Your digest growth doesn't catch up to you for a few years until your values catch up. So this was really designed to be a way to help growing communities stay ahead and not have to wait on property taxes and to shift some of that burden away from property taxpayers. But
A referendum is how we come about this?
I'm
or
sorry?
Is it referendum?
you had legislation that authorized you to do it, and I think there was a referendum 10 years before, maybe in early 2000s or in the 90s, I think is when it happened.
So does it come back up for
No,
vote?
it remains in place.
Okay.
Yeah. And the other part, and David just reminded me, and I'm glad he did, the other thing that lost does is on your tax bill, when there's a millage rate calculation, there's a lost rollback. So it's specifically designed to help relieve the property tax burden.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Okay, Commissioner Barnes, sorry.
Yes, Patrick, goes back to some earlier comments I had about the Amazon internet sales and that sort of thing. I'm in the unincorporated area of McDonald, but I got a McDonald zip code. So do they get credit for those sales, or how does that?
Well, as far as the Department of Revenue receives one giant block of money from everybody within Henry County without regard to whether it's a city or unincorporated county. The taxes are then distributed pursuant to that formula. You are supposed to look at, one of the factors that you look at is how much of this sales tax is generated within a particular city. The idea of it is, if you've got one city generating 80% of your sales tax revenue, they want a bigger share. So that comes in, what city's producing more sales tax revenue comes into play when we negotiate that next time. But there's no, the state doesn't care. They only care about that percentage.
And they basically go by zip codes when it comes to internet sales?
Well, no, they don't even distribute based on they only distribute based on the percentages that we negotiate.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments? I do thank Commissioner Holmes for bringing this forward, because there was a couple of things we need to consider. We got the 2020 census is just around us, and we need to be thinking about especially how some of these annexations can potentially impact us when we get to lost negotiations, even though it's, a couple of years from now. But these are the things that we need to understand, especially as annexations occur and populations changing and all of that. So again, this gives us a good look and understanding. So thank you, Commissioner Holmes.
Yeah, and it is time, honestly, to start easing into the
Yeah.
discussion of next time's
That's right.
renegotiation.
Very good. Commissioner Holmes?
Say, thank you guys for going over laws. I think it's important because a lot of people have gotten the misconception that the county is collecting all the taxes and the cities don't collect anything. So I want the citizens of Stockbridge to know that your city does collect taxes. Actually, you collect the lion's share of everything that's allocated out to the cities. And it's their city's responsibility to manage their city, their 12 square miles. As we know, the county is over 320 square miles, and if you look at what we're allocated, it's not enough money to do the things we need to do in terms of improving our infrastructure, maintaining roads, all of those type of things. So we have a tremendous burden as a county to keep it up and ensure that we can keep quality of life where we need it to be for our citizens. So if possible, I'm hoping that we can add this presentation to social media as well as to the county website, so the citizens can stay updated and stay educated on how their tax dollars are being distributed.